Most people wait for the will reading hoping for a fat check or a nice house. Instead, they get handed a 40-ton boulder, a screaming antique clock, or a fully operational illegal moonshine still. Forget generational wealth. We are looking at the absolute most bizarre, deeply unhinged, and borderline insulting things Americans have actually inherited. 1. Walking into your newly inherited property should feel like hitting the jackpot. Instead, one unlucky heir unlocked the front door to find a house that looked like a crime scene completely reenacted by taxidermy squirrels. His relative had essentially created a deeply unsettling museum of dead rodents playing high-stakes poker, riding tiny custom motorcycles, and even staging the Apollo moon landing. It is a furry, dusty, and incredibly weird display of bizarre talent that you absolutely cannot show to dinner guests without them immediately calling the police or a psychiatrist. Good luck explaining that to a real estate agent. 2. Splitting financial assets in a legal will is always tough. Splitting a biological grass-eating machine is an absolute nightmare. A man down in Texas discovered his grand inheritance was co-ownership of a living, breathing bovine with a complete stranger who was given the exact other half. They do not get to butcher it and split the meat. They actually have to share expensive veterinary bills, coordinate strict feeding schedules, and actively negotiate weekend visitation rights for a giant farm animal. It is essentially the absolute dumbest and most frustrating joint custody battle in the entire history of American agriculture. 3. Lawyers draft some incredibly wild documents, but legally notarizing a bruised ego takes serious dedication to petty family drama. A woman was called into a legal office only to discover she had officially inherited a feeling of profound disappointment from her late father. He actually had his attorneys legally define the emotion, document it, and transfer it to her name. She walked away with absolutely zero financial assets, but she did receive a highly expensive, court-approved piece of paper proving her dad held a massive grudge right up until his final dying breath. 4. Tech startups and real estate portfolios are fantastic things to take over. A Wisconsin payphone repair empire, not so much. A woman was handed the prestigious keys to her father's telecommunications company, only to realize she was now the proud owner of 12 non-working metal boxes and a corporate client list of absolute zero. She basically inherited a business model so incredibly obsolete that it makes her feel entirely useless by association. She cannot even sell the spare parts because absolutely nobody is rushing out to fix a broken dial tone in the smartphone era. 5. Taking in an older family pet sounds completely normal until you sit down and read the bizarre legal fine print. One guy inherited a feline whose legally binding name is Sir Reginald Fluffybutt III, and the will strictly dictates the animal will only respond to its full aristocratic title. Try standing on your front porch shouting that absolute nonsense across your quiet neighborhood at 2 in the morning when the cat refuses to come inside. It is no longer a normal household pet. It is a daily, government-mandated exercise in complete public humiliation. 6. Rich kids usually brag about getting massive trust funds or vintage sports cars. This incredibly unlucky guy got something significantly worse. His inheritance was an official, legally binding job title, the family jester. His grandfather's will formally requires him to perform a mandatory short comedy routine at every single family holiday gathering if he wants to remain in the estate. He did not get $1 million. He got drafted into an unpaid, highly stressful stand-up comedy career for a tough audience of annoyed relatives who already think he is a total disappointment. 7. Financial planning typically involves smart investments or a solid retirement account, not a dedicated budget for psychological warfare. One man was left what his father legally categorized as a revenge fund. It was a bank account containing exactly $5,000, but the legal stipulations clearly stated the cash could only be spent on minor, petty, and incredibly annoying acts of revenge against his dad's former boss. He is legally obligated to ruin a retired manager's life through aggressively annoying magazine subscriptions and poorly timed late-night pizza deliveries just to honor his father's memory. 8. Fine art collections can easily fetch millions of dollars at a high-end auction. Then there is the deeply disturbing lint gallery. When a woman was told she was inheriting her eccentric great-aunt's private artwork, She probably pictured some valuable oil paintings. What she actually received were dozens of celebrity portraits meticulously crafted entirely out of dirty dryer lint. She is now the proud curator of a bizarre hallway exhibit where Tom Hanks has a face made entirely of old socks and underwear fluff. You simply cannot hang that in your living room without looking completely insane. 9. Uncovering a massive box of old family diaries sounds like an absolute goldmine of historical information. The massive twist here is that every single page was written in an insanely complex cryptographic code that absolutely no one in the family has ever been able to decipher. It is either generations of priceless, deeply guarded family wisdom, or 40 years of an old woman intensely complaining about the rising price of eggs at the local grocery store. The unending, unsolvable mystery of it all is the real psychological torture left behind for her descendants. 10. Interior design is usually a matter of personal taste, but this family heirloom is a legally binding eyesore. Most normal folks pass down valuable wedding rings or a nice grandfather clock. This particular family passes down what they ominously call the chair. It is a hideously ugly, aggressively uncomfortable armchair that, according to the ironclad rules of the will, must be given the absolute best spot in the heir's living room. It is a cursed piece of furniture whose only real purpose is to completely ruin the modern decor of every single generation it touches. 11. Sitting through an estate reading usually ends with massive checks being cut or property being heavily divided. This one ended with the transfer of a completely motionless geological asset. A guy was handed a small cardboard box from his wealthy uncle, fully expecting a vintage watch. Inside was an official 1970s pet rock, complete with its original, hilariously detailed training manual. He did not inherit generational wealth or valuable stock options. He simply inherited a heavy rock and a 30-page booklet explaining exactly how to properly house train a completely inanimate object. 12. Holiday cheer was officially weaponized in one father's incredibly specific last will and testament. If you want to talk about highly targeted generational curses, this one takes the absolute cake. A man found out his dad's legal documents stated that, from that day forward, he was personally responsible for untangling the massive ball of family Christmas lights every single year. It was not a casual joke. It was a fully notarized, legally binding sentence to a lifetime of the world's absolute most frustrating task, guaranteeing his Decembers will forever be filled with intense domestic rage. 13. Scavenger hunts from beyond the grave sound like a fun movie plot until the final prize is just absolute psychological damage. A woman arrived at the lawyer's office and was handed a beautifully ornate brass key with a cryptic note stating it unlocks the family's absolute greatest secret. After several expensive years of tearing apart attics and hiring professional locksmiths, she finally discovered it unlocked a tiny, completely empty wooden box hidden inside a basement wall. The grand secret was that there was no secret. It was just an incredibly elaborate, highly orchestrated posthumous prank. 14. Prepping for the apocalypse is a fairly common American hobby, but this inheritance took it to a deeply unappetizing level. A guy from the Midwest inherited a fully functional underground doomsday bunker out in rural Idaho. He thought he hit the prepper jackpot until he finally climbed down the heavy metal ladder. It was not stocked with expensive survival gear or water purifiers. It was wall-to-wall steel shelves holding exactly 4,000 giant jars of industrial mayonnaise. No blankets or medical supplies, just a terrifying amount of heavily processed condiments waiting for the end of the world. 15. Owning foreign real estate usually sounds like an ultimate financial power move. Owning exactly 1 square inch of muddy Scottish dirt is just a hilarious geographical technicality. When a son was told he inherited overseas property, he was ecstatic until he realized the microscopic patch of land technically makes him a lord, but gives him absolutely zero actual space. He gets to put a fancy royal title on his credit cards to impress bartenders, but he literally cannot even fit a single hiking boot on his own sovereign property over 5,000 miles away. 16. Modern smartphones instantly connect us to anyone in the world. One inherited antique rotary phone supposedly connects directly to the space-time continuum. An incredibly bizarre will left a young woman with a heavy telephone completely severed from any wall cords, claiming the device receives important calls directly from the future. The truly unsettling part is that the phone actually does ring on occasion, but it is always entirely wrong numbers aggressively looking for someone named Glargan. It is an incredibly loud loop of cosmic disappointment that constantly interrupts her dinner on a weekly basis. 17. Cracking open a heavy steel safe full of winning lottery tickets should trigger an immediate luxury retirement plan. Finding out they all expired a decade ago triggers a massive existential crisis. A man was completely shocked when he inherited a safe deposit box from his notoriously cheap uncle, only to find millions of dollars in uncashed scratch-offs. The heartbreaking catch was that every single ticket was officially void. It remains the most financially devastating and emotionally cruel practical joke in the entire history of legal inheritance. Truly a beautiful masterclass in posthumous trolling. 18. Hoarding rare coins is a highly respected hobby, but hoarding thousands of fast food sporks requires a special kind of dedication to terrible dining experiences. His beloved grandfather's grand legacy was not a vintage car or a fat bank account. It was a massive cardboard box containing every single plastic spork the old man had ever acquired over 60 years from random gas stations and questionable cafeterias. It was an absolute arsenal of the world's most inefficient eating utensil, standing permanently as a bizarre plastic monument to incredibly indecisive cutlery choices. 19. Landscaping decisions are usually completely up to the homeowner. That is, unless your inheritance legally forbids you from ever moving a 40-ton rock. A woman out in Nevada was legally given a single massive boulder that her incredibly eccentric father had deliberately placed right in the middle of his front yard. The strict legal stipulations of the will demanded that the giant eyesore could never be moved, sold, or destroyed. She now legally owns a residential property with a permanent, completely immovable, and aggressively pointless geological feature dominating her entire curb appeal. 20. Time capsules are supposed to securely hold valuable historical treasures for future generations. They are not supposed to hold a petrified, heavily salted potato artifact from a fast food drive-thru. Her highly anticipated inheritance was a sealed box that she was legally forbidden to open until her 21st birthday. She finally cracked it open to find a single, deeply hardened McDonald's French fry from the exact year she was born, alongside a scribbled note reading, "See, some things really do last forever." It was not sentimental in the slightest. It was just incredibly weird and highly unsanitary. 21. Inheriting a massive designer wardrobe is an absolute dream for most people. Inheriting a garage completely stuffed with hundreds of promotional canvas tote bags is just an absolute fire hazard waiting to happen. A woman up in Oregon discovered she had inherited her aunt's entire, obsessive collection of free-with-purchase bags. They were hoarded from decades of public radio fundraisers, random grocery store grand openings, and obscure dental conventions. Her grand inheritance is basically an unorganized army of flimsy fabric that smells faintly of cheap mothballs and completely broken consumer dreams. 22. Criminal empires usually deal in stolen cash, fine art, or illegal contraband. This sweet old lady exclusively specialized in stealing Monopoly cards. The reading of the will excitedly promised the transfer of an entire fortune to a young woman, who eagerly opened a heavy lockbox, only to find thousands of tiny orange get-out-of-jail-free cards. Her bizarrely kleptomaniac great-aunt had spent her entire adult life secretly slipping the single most useless piece of paper into her purse at every family game night. Talk about a completely worthless, highly specific life of crime. 23. Leaving behind $0 in a will is certainly one way to send a harsh message. Leaving an officially voided coupon for physical affection is just absolutely ice cold. One man sat in a serious lawyer's office to find out he had inherited exactly one single, physically expired coupon, good for one free hug. It was originally issued by his late, famously grumpy grandfather decades ago, and the lawyer even legally noted that the offer was officially void. It is a highly sarcastic, legally binding document mathematically proving that a hug was never an option. 24. Small business owners usually pass down the company ledger or the keys to the warehouse. This dad bypassed all that and handed down a highly illegal, heavily detailed tropical exit strategy. A man expected to inherit his father's struggling hardware business, but instead received a thick leather binder ominously titled The Plan. Inside was a meticulously researched, step-by-step operational guide on exactly how to successfully fake his own death and legally escape to the sunny beaches of Belize. He did not get a single dime, but he got a fully thought-out criminal contingency plan. 25. Legal battles over property lines are a totally normal thing to deal with. Inheriting an active lawsuit against the fundamental scientific laws of physics is a whole new level of crazy. One unfortunate son inherited his father's very real, ongoing court battle against the actual concept of gravity, which the stubborn old man filed after slipping on some black ice back in 2007. He did not inherit a fat financial settlement. He inherited a deeply embarrassing, highly expensive legacy of being spectacularly and aggressively wrong in a public courtroom. 26. Storage units hide plenty of dark, forgotten family secrets. Cranking open a rusty metal door to find a life-sized cardboard army of your own past selves is pure nightmare fuel. His only inheritance was a single key leading to a climate-controlled unit on the edge of town. Inside, he found dozens of cardboard cutouts of himself, one for every single year he had been alive, secretly manufactured by his alarmingly obsessive mother. He now officially owns a creepy, entirely silent audience staring back at him from his awkward teenage years. 27. Some people inherit quiet, peaceful country homes. One guy inherited a massive, heavily rusted Cold War air raid siren bolted to his new roof. The official will strictly dictated it must remain fully operational and tested monthly to honor his paranoid grandfather's legacy. He did not inherit a relaxing piece of real estate. He inherited an incredibly loud, historically obsolete neighborhood noise violation that terrifies the entire cul-de-sac every single time he flips the heavy metal switch. 28. Personal security is incredibly important in this day and age. Wearing a heavy winter jacket permanently wired with dozens of screeching panic alarms is just a guaranteed way to lose your hearing. While prestigious families pass down a historical coat of arms, this highly paranoid family passes down what they legally designated as a coat of alarms. The official will strictly instructed the new heir to wear it outside at all times for protection. It absolutely does not protect you from anything. It just ensures you will completely deafen yourself in the grocery store checkout line. 29. Bronze statues are typically commissioned to commemorate great military leaders or historical events. A single bronzed chicken nugget securely mounted on a slab of marble simply commemorates a very weird trip to the drive-thru. A man living in Pennsylvania was deeply confused when he inherited this bizarre culinary artifact. The formally attached note from his late father simply read, "A reminder that true perfection can be found in the absolute strangest of places." He missed out on the vintage car and instead got a permanently deep-fried piece of heavily philosophized poultry. 30. Massive libraries are supposed to hold the grand sum of human knowledge and literature. This newly inherited library holds absolutely nothing but thousands of identical television schedules from 1993. A woman eagerly awaited her portion of the so-called family fortune, which turned out to be a floor-to-ceiling collection of vintage TV guides, all from the exact same random week in November. The formal will boldly claimed it was definitively the absolute greatest week in television history. It is not an inheritance. It is a massive fire hazard built around a very weird opinion. 31. Digital assets are rapidly becoming the absolute future of inheritance planning. Unless those specific assets are permanently trapped on thousands of ancient, brightly colored floppy disks with no compatible drive anywhere in sight. The family's highly guarded greatest treasure was legally promised on these archaic plastic squares. A young tech bro in Silicon Valley inherited the massive pile, wondering if it contained the actual secret to cold fusion, or just 40,000 saved games of Windows Minesweeper. Trying to locate a working disk drive in the modern era is significantly harder than finding actual pirate treasure. 32. Antique clocks are supposed to add a subtle touch of elegance and class to any quiet hallway. That is, until the hour strikes and it unleashes a blood-curdling digital human scream instead of a traditional chime. She was absolutely thrilled when she inherited a stunning, meticulously crafted grandfather clock from the 1800s. It looks absolutely beautiful, but someone secretly wired it to emit a terrifying scream every 60 minutes. It is essentially a gorgeous piece of fine furniture and a high-budget horror movie jump scare wrapped into one deeply traumatizing package. 33. Earning the prestigious title of Best Father takes years of incredible sacrifice and patience. Inheriting the exact same title through a legally binding novelty coffee mug takes about 5 minutes at a local notary public. If you are looking for the absolute weirdest legal flex from beyond the grave, this is it. A man inherited a completely standard, cheap ceramic World's Best Dad mug. But his father actually had a document legally notarized, officially transferring the highly coveted title directly to his son. He inherited a lifetime of impossible parenting pressure for $2. 34. Passing down a collection of rare first edition books sounds incredibly sophisticated. Passing down a massive library of bright yellow instructional manuals is really just a documented chronological history of personal failure. A man from Ohio sat in total disbelief as he inherited his late uncle's floor-to-ceiling collection of For Dummies books. It included absolute classics like Windows 95 for Dummies, Basic Astrology for Dummies, and Surviving Divorce for Dummies. It is not a financial inheritance at all. It is basically a very sad, aggressively color-coded biography of a guy who struggled with absolutely everything. 35. True generational wealth is not always measured in heavy gold bullion or massive real estate portfolios. According to one highly organized Chicago mother, it is measured in a massive collection of vintage plastic containers that actually have their matching lids. The lawyer confidently read the will, which promised to pass down her absolutely most valuable worldly possession. The daughter inherited a meticulously maintained Tupperware collection, where every single piece had its correct original top. To her deeply obsessive mother, a perfect reality where food containers actually match is literally the ultimate form of riches. 36. Sweet grandmothers usually leave behind a box of secret family recipes or beautiful knitting patterns. This particular woman left behind a deeply aggressive, 50-year archive of furious letters demanding immediate refunds for slightly leaky pens. Her granddaughter opened a beautifully tied ribbon box, explicitly labeled as private love letters. They were definitely not romantic notes. They were dozens of highly articulate, wonderfully unhinged complaint letters mailed to various random companies demanding compensation for visually disappointing canned peas. It is not a romantic legacy. It is a documented history of pure, unadulterated consumer rage. 37. Finding out you inherited actual intellectual property usually means massive royalty checks are in your immediate future. Unfortunately for one guy, he inherited the official United States patent for a heavily modified squirrel saddle. His incredibly eccentric grandfather had apparently spent thousands of dollars on lawyers to legally secure the manufacturing rights to tiny leather riding gear designed exclusively for backyard rodents. He did not inherit millions of dollars in tech royalties. He simply owns a completely useless legal document proving his family tree had far too much free time and a wildly unhinged imagination. 38. Estate planning can get pretty defensive when you have a messy family tree. One woman walked out of a high-end law office holding a fully prepaid, completely active 5-year restraining order against her own cousin Barry. They always say that you really cannot put a price tag on familial love, but you can apparently put a firm legal price tag on keeping weird relatives away from your property. The official will provide absolutely zero context. She simply possesses an ironclad legal document preventing a man she barely even knows from coming anywhere near her driveway. 39. Lifelong VIP access to a massive amusement park sounds like an incredibly sweet deal for any kid. It is significantly less sweet when the property was completely bulldozed and paved over to build a strip mall 20 years ago. One incredibly unfortunate soul out in Arizona inherited a single, legally non-transferable lifetime pass to a local water park that permanently closed its doors back in 2003. It is absolutely not a financial asset. It is just a sad, heavily laminated reminder of summer fun that literally no longer exists on this earth. 40. Video archives can hold priceless, highly sentimental family memories. But this guy was handed an absolute masterclass in pure, unadulterated boredom. His entire grand inheritance consisted of over 2,000 meticulously labeled VHS tapes stacked inside a damp garage. They definitely did not contain cute home movies or classic Hollywood films. His paranoid uncle had dedicated 30 entire years to recording absolutely nothing but the local Weather Channel. He essentially inherited thousands of hours of highly outdated meteorology forecasts and completely useless Doppler radar updates from the 1990s. 41. Taking over the family farm usually implies early mornings, feeding chickens and fixing broken tractors. It rarely implies taking over a highly illegal, multi-generational underground liquor operation. Everyone thought this guy was going to inherit massive acres of fertile land down in North Carolina. But the real inheritance was secretly hiding out in the old barn. He inherited a fully functional, highly illegal copper moonshine still that had been secretly operating for 3 entire decades. He essentially inherited a backcountry criminal enterprise and a neighborhood full of very thirsty locals. Absolutely no pressure at all. 42. Medals of honor showcase true bravery on the battlefield. 27 consecutive photographs of awkward retail smiles showcase a terrifying level of dedication to a local neighborhood hardware store. The grandfather's legal will was incredibly simple, stating he was leaving his absolute greatest accomplishment to his only son. The son eagerly expected a hidden gold watch, but instead was handed a small shoebox containing every single glossy employee of the month photograph his dad had ever won. It was almost 3 decades of slightly different polyester shirts passing as a massive generational achievement. 43. Physical media is slowly making a cool retro comeback, but absolutely nobody on Earth is nostalgic for a garage completely filled with thousands of useless dial-up internet trial discs. When the lawyers finally settled his eccentric uncle's entire estate, the guy was handed a massive stack of heavy metal tins. It turned out to be every single free AOL CD the old man had ever received in the physical mail since 1995. He basically inherited a massive physical monument to the agonizing dial-up era and a lifetime supply of the world's absolute worst drink coasters. 44. Deeply guarded family secrets are usually taken straight to the grave. That is, unless your chatty great aunt leaves behind a feathered snitch that constantly yells about insurance fraud to every single houseguest. A family living down in Florida inherited a highly observant African gray parrot named Rico, who spent 20 years simply listening to the old woman aggressively complain on the telephone. He absolutely does not want a cracker. He just wants to loudly announce to visiting neighbors that Uncle Dave entirely faked his major back injury for a massive payout back in '92. 45. A reliable, highly trained guard dog brings absolute peace of mind to any homeowner. A highly aggressive, violently territorial water bird, legally mandated to guard your front yard, brings absolutely nothing but neighborhood lawsuits. One extremely unlucky man inherited an official guard goose named Hannibal. According to the strict rules of the will, this terrifying creature must be permanently maintained on the property to aggressively protect the family honor. The bird protects absolutely nothing of value. It just relentlessly attacks the innocent mail carrier and violently hisses at completely harmless delivery drivers all day long. 46. Commercial real estate is always a fantastic financial asset, unless that real estate is just an aggressively weird highway billboard in the absolute middle of nowhere. One woman inherited a massive, fully illuminated advertising sign on a lonely stretch of desert highway. The brutal legal catch in the will is that she is strictly forbidden from ever changing the actual advertisement. It permanently features a giant, low-resolution photograph of her late uncle aggressively eating a hot dog with the bold caption, "I told you I would do it." She now pays expensive monthly electricity bills just to deeply confuse passing truckers. 47. Custom board games usually make for fantastic, quirky conversational pieces in a living room. A fully functional chess set meticulously crafted from a dead man's extracted yellowing incisors will practically guarantee that absolutely nobody ever speaks to you again. a young woman was horrified to inherit a wooden box, where her late grandfather had spent years individually setting each of his pulled teeth into bizarre custom pieces. The king naturally featured a tiny gold dental crown. She now owns an entire game constructed from human biological waste, effectively ruining family game night forever. 48. Real estate usually comes with a nice paved driveway or a quiet private road. One guy up in Maine inherited a completely unregulated, privately owned dirt road toll booth, leading into a local farming town. His grandfather's ironclad will legally forces him to sit in a tiny wooden shack every single morning and demand exactly 12 cents from extremely annoyed locals driving tractors. He essentially inherited a highly unpopular, deeply unprofitable, and completely absurd localized tax monopoly. 49. Massive cross-country road trips are a fantastic way to see the beautiful American landscape. Being legally blackmailed by a dead relative into driving across 3 state lines to blindly apologize to a complete stranger is just bizarre. One guy simply inherited a mandatory promise from his uncle's legally binding will, officially forcing him to drive to Nebraska to personally apologize to a woman named Brenda for the incident at the 1994 State Fair. He has absolutely no clue what the actual incident was, but he legally has to go say sorry anyway. 50. Ancient treasure maps usually point to hidden pirate gold and grand adventures. This heavily detailed hand-drawn neighborhood map simply pointed to every single person who had ever slightly annoyed a highly paranoid old lady. There are definitely some things that should absolutely stay completely buried, and the contents of this specific will are a prime example. A woman inherited a meticulously mapped guide of her entire small town, brightly marking the exact residential houses of absolutely anyone who had offended her great-aunt. It is just a highly precise cartographical guide to 100 deeply petty grudges. Let's be brutally honest here. Half of you watching are definitely leaving behind something completely worthless just to spite your kids. Tell me exactly what petty garbage you're putting in your will right down in the comments. I want to read the most toxic answers. Also, subscribe and like this video right now, or I am legally leaving you my medical debt.